755 AD, it's believed that there was a timber church stood on this site. Saxon in origin, or so it's believed. Welcome to History Walks. Little is known of the history of Bunbury before the Norman conquest, but it's believed that the name is of Saxon origin and that the Christian place of worship stood here on what today we know as St Boniface Church. The village of Bunbury was mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086 as being Bowlberry, and the lord of the manor was Robert Fitzhugh. Robert was also to become lord of the manor in nearby Beeston, Birdworsley, and not forgetting the village of Spurstow. But the Domesday Book of 1086 also shows that there was a priest in residence here. That in itself is important. In 1135, the first stone church was built here by the Normans. However, in 1320, it was built again in a decorated style. But it was in the year 1386 that one Sir Hugh Cavalier endowed a college of priests here at Bunbury. Later in the programme, we'll be taking a closer look at his alabaster tomb effigy that still stands today in the centre of the chancel. St Boniface Church has been a place of worship for well over 1,000 years. However, during that time, it's seen many great events in history. In 1527, the Ridley Chapel inside the church was begun by Sir Ralph Egerton, whilst in 1548 the College of Priests was dissolved during the Reformation, resulting in Bunbury losing its endowments. It was at this time the church reverted back to the Crown. In the year 1642, the magnates of Cheshire met here at St Boniface Church for the so-called Bunbury Convention. The purpose of the convention was to declare the county of Cheshire as being neutral in the Civil War conflict between Parliament and the King. But the neutrality wasn't to last, and in 1643 the church was attacked by the Royalists, with cannon fire causing immense damage to the building. Are these pieces of masonry that we find lying around today remnants from that awful time? The tower you see behind me has a story in itself. Built during the rebuild of the church in the 14th century by Hugh Cavalier. The tower has walls almost 6 feet thick and is founded on a sandstone outcrop. Standing at 70 feet tall, the walls are more than strong enough to support the huge stress applied to them by the swinging of 8 bells. The oldest of these bells dates right back to the 16th century. I'm sure, like me, you'll agree that the church and the churchyard are stunning. However, the inside of the church is even more stunning, with relics dating back to as early as the 14th century. As we enter the church, you can't help but be in awe of the magnificence of what we find. The stunning architecture is breathtaking, and there's so much to take in. There are many wonderful archaic treasures to be found here at St Boniface Church, and I'm sure that you'll agree with me when I say that they are simply stunning pieces of our past, preserved for the future. This is our heritage at its best. Here on the north side of St Boniface, we find a statue of Jane Johnson, wife of the dancing master of Nantwich. Unfortunately, she died in 1741. Now this statue once stood next to the altar. However, in 1760, the vicar took a dislike to it. He decided it was time to bury the statue out of sight. The reason why the vicar didn't like this statue, because in his own words, the bulging udders were revolting. This is why the statue was secretly buried in the grounds of the church. However, in 1882, the statue was rediscovered in the graveyard by the then vicar, William Lowe. He really believed he'd found a statue of the Virgin Mary and had it reinstated in the church with much pomp and ceremony. Now, most churches across England will have a stone font, and St. Boniface is no exception. And what a beautiful font this is, carved from stone in the year 1663. It's amazing to think how many people have been christened in this church since that time. It's here on the wall of the south aisle that we find some medieval painted panels that have come from Parclose Panels. They're absolutely stunning, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, some of the best in Cheshire. Painted in the 15th century, these panels were restored by the Victoria and Albert Museum back in 1988. It's here to the south of the chancel that we find the Ridley Chapel, built during the 16th century and funded by Sir Ralph Egerton. The stone screen to the Ridley Chapel, constructed in 1527, is the only substantial painted medieval screen to survive in Cheshire. It's here in the chancel where we find two amazing stone effigies that remain intact to this day. In the centre of the chancel stands a beautifully carved alabaster effigy, that of Sir Hugh Calverley, who died on the 23rd of April, 1394. Sir Hugh was a knight and a commander and took part in the 100 Years' War. He held various military posts, especially in Brittany and, of course, Normandy. It was here in the 1380s where he founded and endowed a college of priests. Now, we're not sure whether Sir Hugh is actually buried here, but either way, his effigy is imposing and it represents a great man. Now, one thing that you will see all over this statue is graffiti. But this isn't modern graffiti. It was indeed applied during the English Civil War when prisoners were held within the church. Our second effigy, to be found here in the chancel, is that of Sir George Beeston, who died on the 13th of September 1601. Sir George was the owner of the Manor of Beeston and also Beeston Castle. He lived his life as a soldier and sailor and was recorded as one of the captains ordered to keep the narrow seas in the year 1562. But George's greatest moment came on the 26th of July 1588, when he was knighted on the deck of the Ark Royal by Lord Effingham for his role as captain when he engaged the Spanish fleet. There's no doubt that Sir George Beeston lived a full and active life as a soldier and a sailor in defence of the English crown. During his life, he served under 4 monarchs, from Henry VIII right through to Elizabeth I. Sir George certainly made his mark on the history of 16th century England. But St. Boniface was yet to suffer once again from another event of British history. The year was 1940 as disaster struck. That night, Liverpool had suffered another blitz by German bombers attempting to destroy the docks and disrupt the city. Following the raid, the bombers turned and headed home on their long, arduous journey back to Germany. However, they were carrying too much weight and needed to lighten their load quickly. Having been fired upon so heavily, they jettisoned a large landmine and they flew over Bunbury. The landmine landed and exploded in the churchyard, blowing out over 20 windows and starting a fire that engulfed the roof. But despite this tragedy, local fundraising meant that the church was eventually fully restored to what we see today. There's little doubt that St. Boniface Church has been a fundamental part of the archaic history of the Cheshire village of Bunbury. From at least the 8th century, this site has played host to some of the most important and famous families, lords of the manor, earls and barons, who shaped Bunbury and the surrounding villages to what we see today. To have been able to come here today and witness for myself the beauty of St. Boniface Church and learn more about the history of Bunbury has been an absolute privilege. My heartfelt thanks go out to Reverend Tim Hayward, Vicar of St. Boniface Church, for his help and his cooperation in making this film. My name's James Barman. Join me again soon when we take another history walk into the past.